The bullet tore through the dusty air of Redemption Creek as Vincent Hart stood motionless, watching the gang of outlaws flee with the town's monthly payroll. It was 1875, and the West was still wild, but Vincent hadn't truly felt alive since Sarah was lowered into the ground 3 winters ago. He holstered his Colt without firing a single shot, something the old Vincent would never have done. "You just gonna let them ride off with our money, Sheriff?" Thomas from the Mercantile shouted, his face red with anger. Vincent adjusted his badge, the silver star catching the harsh afternoon sun. "I'll track them at first light. Better than chasing shadows and getting more men killed." The small crowd that had gathered dispersed with disappointed murmurs. Vincent didn't care much about their opinions these days. Time was when he would have jumped on his horse and given chase immediately, but that Vincent died alongside Sarah after the fever took her. He made his way down the main street, dust kicking up around his worn boots. Redemption Creek had grown in the 5 years since he'd become sheriff. What started as little more than a trading post had blossomed into a proper town with a hotel, several saloons, a schoolhouse, and even a small theater where traveling shows occasionally performed. Vincent pushed through the batwing doors of the Broken Spur, his usual haunt since Sarah's passing. The familiar smell of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies greeted him. He took his regular seat at the corner table, back to the wall, facing the entrance, old habits from years on the trail. "The usual sheriff," old Pete, the bartender, called out. Vincent nodded, and soon a glass of whiskey appeared before him. He downed it in one swallow, welcoming the burning sensation that momentarily distracted him from the emptiness. "Another," he said, sliding the glass back across the worn wooden table. Pete hesitated. "You sure that's wise, considering you're tracking outlaws tomorrow?" Vincent fixed him with a hard stare. "Just pour the drink, Pete." The older man sighed but complied. Vincent had earned respect in these parts, both for his fast draw and fair judgment, but lately that respect was tinged with pity. He hated it. The doors swung open, and a woman Vincent had never seen before entered. The saloon fell momentarily silent, as it always did when a newcomer arrived, especially a woman who wasn't one of the saloon girls. She was tall, with auburn hair pinned up beneath a practical hat. Her traveling dress was dusty but of good quality. She surveyed the room with confident green eyes before making her way to the bar. "I'm looking for accommodations," she said to Pete, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. "I was told the hotel is full due to the cattle buyers in town." Pete nodded. "That's right, madam. Not a room to be had there till at least the end of the week." "I see." She didn't look particularly troubled by this news. "And is there somewhere else I might stay? I'm planning to be in town for some time. Mrs. Wilson sometimes takes in boarders," Pete offered. "Her place is just past the church. Thank you." She turned to leave but paused when she noticed Vincent watching her. With surprising boldness, she approached his table. "You're the sheriff, I presume," she said, nodding toward his badge. Vincent straightened slightly. "I am." "Sheriff Vincent Hart. Something I can help you with, miss." "Mrs. Beatrice Lawrence," she corrected. "I'm here on business regarding the stagecoach line. I've heard there have been several robberies in this area recently." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "The stagecoach line is your business?" A small smile played at her lips. "It is now. My late husband owned shares in the Western Transit Company. I've come to assess the situation personally." This piqued Vincent's interest despite himself. Women who owned businesses were uncommon enough, but one who traveled alone to a rough frontier town to manage it was rarer still. "Well, Mrs. Lawrence, you've arrived on an interesting day. The town's payroll was just stolen by the Keegan gang not 2 hours ago." Her eyes widened slightly. "And you're sitting here drinking instead of pursuing them?" The saloon went quiet. No one spoke to the sheriff that way. Vincent studied her for a long moment. "Night tracking in this territory is a fool's errand, madam. I'll catch them tomorrow when I can see their trail and they think they're safe." She considered this, then nodded. "A strategic approach. I appreciate that." She glanced at the empty chair across from him. "May I?" Vincent hesitated, then gestured for her to sit. He hadn't voluntarily shared a table with anyone in years, especially not a woman. "Pete, bring the lady a drink," he called. "Just water, please," she amended. As Pete brought her water, Beatrice removed her gloves and set them on the table. Vincent noticed she still wore her wedding ring. "So, Mrs. Lawrence, what does a stagecoach company representative plan to do about these robberies?" he asked. "Implement better security measures, for one," she replied, "and perhaps hire additional guards for certain routes." Vincent nodded. "The Keegan gang has been hitting stagecoaches and payrolls within a 50-mile radius for months now. They're organized and well-armed. Then they need to be stopped," she said matter-of-factly. "I agree. That's why I'm going after them tomorrow." She took a sip of water. "Alone. My deputy's laid up with a broken leg, and I don't trust the volunteers to do more than get in the way or get themselves killed." "That seems dangerous, Sheriff," Vincent shrugged. "Danger's part of the job. And do you care if you come back alive from this job, Sheriff Hart?" Her question was direct, her gaze unwavering. The saloon seemed to fade away as Vincent stared at her. Few people dared to speak so plainly about what everyone whispered about that Sheriff Hart had a death wish ever since his wife died. "Madam, I always intend to complete my duties," he answered carefully. "That's not what I asked." Vincent stood abruptly. "It's getting late, Mrs. Lawrence. Pete can point you toward Mrs. Wilson's boarding house. Good evening." He left without waiting for her response, disturbed by how easily this stranger had seen through him. The cool night air did little to clear his head as he walked toward his small house at the edge of town. It was a home he'd built for Sarah, filled with furniture he'd crafted himself, decorated with items she'd chosen. Now it was just an empty shell where he slept and occasionally ate. Vincent prepared his gear for the morning's pursuit, cleaning his Winchester rifle and checking his ammunition. As he worked, his mind kept returning to Beatrice Lawrence's piercing question. "Do you care if you come back alive?" The truth was, he didn't much care either way. He'd do his job, and if the Keegan gang's bullets found him, so be it. If not, he'd return to Redemption Creek and continue existing. He couldn't call it living anymore. Dawn came early, as it always did. Vincent saddled his horse, a sturdy roan gelding named Copper, and rode out of town without speaking to anyone. The trail was easy enough to follow. The gang hadn't bothered to hide their tracks, confident in their head start. Around midday, Vincent spotted something unexpected on the horizon, a rider, moving fast in his direction. As they drew closer, he recognized the practical hat and straight posture of Beatrice Lawrence. She rode astride like a man, her divided skirt allowing her to control her mount with impressive skill. "Mrs. Lawrence," he called as she approached, "this is no place for a social call." She reined in beside him, barely winded. "I'm not making a social call, Sheriff. I'm joining your pursuit." Vincent stared at her in disbelief. "That's out of the question. The Keegan gang has robbed 3 of my company's stagecoaches. This is my business as much as yours." She patted the rifle secured to her saddle. "And I assure you, I know how to use this. It's dangerous." "Yes, you mentioned that yesterday," she smiled slightly. "Yet here we both are." Vincent scowled. "I don't have time to argue. Go back to town." "I will not." Her chin lifted stubbornly. "Either we ride together or I follow you. Your choice, Sheriff." Vincent considered his options. Forcing her to return would waste valuable time, and if she followed him anyway, she'd be in even more danger. "Fine," he conceded reluctantly, "but you follow my orders. If I tell you to ride away, you do it. No questions." "Agreed," she said, surprising him with her quick acquiescence. "Now, shall we continue? The tracks lead northwest." They rode in silence for a while, following the clear trail left by 6 horses. Vincent occasionally glanced at his unexpected companion. She rode with the ease of someone who had spent considerable time in the saddle, her back straight, hands steady on the reins. "Where did you learn to ride like that?" he finally asked. "Doesn't seem like an Eastern lady's accomplishment." "I wasn't always an Eastern lady," she replied. "I grew up in Missouri. My father raised horses before he lost everything in the war." Vincent nodded. The war had changed many lives, his included. He'd fought for the Union, returned to find his family farm in ruins, and decided to head west for a fresh start. That's when he'd met Sarah, a schoolteacher in a small Kansas town. "And your husband?" he asked. "Was he a horseman too?" Edward was a businessman through and through. Never comfortable in the saddle, a fond smile crossed her face. "He used to say I rode well enough for both of us." "How long has he been gone?" 2 years this spring," she said quietly. "Influenza." Vincent felt an unwelcome kinship with her. "My Sarah's been gone 3 years." Same thing took her. They rode in silence again, but it felt different now, less strained, more companionable. By late afternoon, they reached a forested area where the tracks became harder to follow. Vincent dismounted to examine the ground more closely. "They've split up," he announced, pointing to where the tracks diverged. 3 went this way, 3 that way. Beatrice dismounted beside him. A standard tactic, divide pursuers' forces. Vincent looked at her with new respect. "You know something about outlaws." "I've been researching since they started targeting our coaches," she explained. "Know your enemy, Sheriff Hart." "Vincent," he said suddenly. "If we're riding into danger together, you might as well use my name," she nodded. "And I'm Beatrice." He studied the tracks again. The 3 carrying the heavier load went north. "That'll be the money, the others are a diversion." "Then we follow the money," Beatrice concluded. They continued on foot, leading their horses through the increasingly dense forest. Vincent moved cautiously, alert to any signs of an ambush. Beatrice followed his example, stepping carefully to minimize noise. "There," Vincent whispered, pointing to a thin plume of smoke rising above the trees ahead. "Likely their camp." They secured their horses and proceeded on foot. As they crept closer, voices became audible. "Should have split the money now," one man was saying. "Don't trust Keegan to give us our fair share." "Shut up," another voice replied. "We'll meet up tomorrow as planned and divide it then. Keegan ain't never cheated us before." Vincent gestured for Beatrice to stay put while he circled around to get a better view. 3 men sat around a small fire, saddlebags presumably containing the stolen money piled nearby. Their horses were tethered a short distance away. He returned to Beatrice and whispered his plan. "I'll approach from the south, get the drop on them. If shooting starts, you stay down, understand?" She nodded, but her expression was determined. "I'll circle east. If they run for the horses, I can cut them off." "That wasn't the plan," Vincent hissed. "It's a better plan," she insisted. "You can't cover all angles alone." Before he could argue further, she slipped away through the trees. Vincent cursed under his breath but had no choice now but to proceed. He moved into position, drew his revolver and stepped into the clearing. "Hands up, gentlemen." "You're under arrest for robbery." The outlaws froze momentarily, then chaos erupted. One dived for his gun while another flipped over the table for cover. The third made a break for the horses. Vincent shot the first man in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. The second fired wildly, forcing Vincent to duck behind a tree. From the direction of the horses came another shot. Beatrice had kept her word. "That's your friend with the broken leg, Corbin," she called out. "Surrender now." The remaining outlaw behind the table cursed. "We're surrounded." "You are," Vincent confirmed, though it was just the 2 of them. "Throw out your weapons." After a tense moment, a revolver skidded across the dirt from behind the table. "Don't shoot, I'm coming out." Within minutes, Vincent had all 3 outlaws disarmed and secured. The one Beatrice had shot was merely winged, the bullet having grazed his thigh. The saddlebags contained the stolen payroll intact. As Vincent bound the outlaw's hands, Beatrice kept them covered with her rifle, her aim steady. "That was reckless," he told her when they finally had a moment alone, "but I'm grateful for the help." She lowered her rifle, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "You're welcome, Sheriff. Still, you could have been killed." "So could you," she countered. "Perhaps we both have a problem with self-preservation." The comment struck too close to home. Vincent turned away, focusing on securing the prisoners for the journey back to town. They made camp for the night, taking turns watching the outlaws. When it was Beatrice's watch, Vincent found himself unable to sleep, his mind too full of the day's events. He sat up, watching her silhouette against the dying fire. "You should rest," she said without turning. "I've got this." "I know you do." He moved to sit beside her. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My father taught me, said a woman alone needs to protect herself." Wise man, he was. She poked at the fire with a stick. He would have liked you. Vincent hadn't thought about being liked in a long time. What makes you say that? You're straightforward, no pretense. He valued that. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the night sounds of the forest surrounding them. Earlier, Vincent finally said, you mentioned we both have a problem with self-preservation. What did you mean by that? Beatrice was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. After Edward died, I found myself taking risks I never would have before, riding alone at night, confronting difficult business associates, coming west by myself. She looked at him directly. It wasn't that I wanted to die, I just didn't particularly care if I lived. The honesty of her words resonated deeply. I know that feeling. I thought you might, she smiled sadly. It's in your eyes, the same look I see in my mirror. Does it get better? He asked, surprising himself with the question. Some days, she replied. Today was better than most. Vincent realized with a start that today had been better for him too. For the first time in years, he'd felt something other than numb detachment or bitter grief. He'd felt alive. We should get these men back to town tomorrow, he said, changing the subject. The other three will be wondering what happened to their friends. Do you think they'll come looking? Possibly. Keegan's loyal to his men, which is rare among outlaws. Beatrice nodded thoughtfully. Then we should be prepared. The return journey to Redemption Creek took most of the next day. Word of their approach spread quickly, and by the time they rode down the main street with their prisoners and the recovered money, a crowd had gathered. Sheriff's got the money back. Who's that woman with him? Isn't that the Eastern lady asking about the stagecoach line? Vincent ignored the whispers, leading the prisoners directly to the jailhouse. Deputy Miller hobbled out on his crutches, eyes widening at the sight. Didn't expect you back so soon, Sheriff, and with company no less, Mrs. Lawrence was instrumental in capturing these men, Vincent said as he dismounted. We still need to find Keegan and the other two. News of their success spread rapidly through town. That evening, the town council insisted on buying them dinner at the hotel restaurant, a far cry from Vincent's usual solitary meal at the saloon. He sat uncomfortably at the head of the table, unused to being the center of attention. Beatrice, seated to his right, leaned in and whispered, Smile, Sheriff, you're a hero today. He attempted a smile that felt foreign on his face. This isn't my idea of a celebration. What would be, he considered the question, a quiet drink, maybe some music. That can be arranged, she murmured before turning to address the mayor. Gentlemen, while I appreciate your hospitality, the sheriff and I have had a long day. If you'll excuse us. Before anyone could protest, she had stood and was guiding Vincent from the restaurant. Outside, the evening air was cool and refreshing after the stuffy dining room. Thank you, Vincent said sincerely. You looked like a man being marched to the gallows, she laughed. Now, about that quiet drink and music, he raised an eyebrow. You have something in mind, Mrs. Wilson mentioned there's a small tavern at the edge of town, less crowded with a piano player most nights. The tavern was indeed quieter than the Broken Spur. A few tables were occupied by older men playing cards, and a bearded fellow played soft melodies on an upright piano in the corner. Vincent and Beatrice found a table near the back. This is more like it, Vincent admitted after they'd been served. Beatrice sipped her sherry. I prefer establishments where I can hear myself think. The piano player shifted to a slower, melancholy tune. Vincent recognized it Lorna, a song popular during the war about lost love. He danced to it with Sarah once at a town social. Penny for your thoughts, Beatrice said, noticing his distant expression. Just remembering, he replied. Sarah loved this song. Beatrice listened for a moment. It's beautiful but sad, like most true things. Vincent took a drink of his whiskey. Tell me about her, Beatrice said gently. The request surprised him. Most people avoided mentioning Sarah around him. She was kind, smarter than me by half, loved to read, could name every star in the sky. He smiled despite himself. Had a terrible singing voice but didn't let that stop her. Beatrice smiled. She sounds wonderful, she was. What about Edward? Ambitious, clever with numbers, terribly formal in public but would dance with me in our kitchen when no one was watching. Her eyes grew distant. He had plans for us a grand house in Boston, children's social standing, and now you're running his stagecoach company in the Wild West instead. Life takes unexpected turns, she raised her glass. To those we've lost. Vincent clinked his glass against hers. To those we've lost. They stayed at the tavern until the piano player finished for the night. Vincent walked Beatrice back to Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, the streets of Redemption Creek quiet and bathed in moonlight. At the door, she turned to him. Thank you for the evening, Vincent. I should be thanking you for the rescue from that dinner and for today. She studied him for a moment. Will you continue tracking Keegan first thing tomorrow, though I suspect he's long gone by now? Perhaps not. Men like that are often predictable in their unpredictability. At his questioning look, she continued, he won't abandon his men. He'll either try to break them out or avenge them. Vincent considered this. You may be right. I usually am, she said with a small smile. Good night, Sheriff. He tipped his hat. Good night, Mrs. Lawrence. As he walked back to his empty house, Vincent realized he felt lighter than he had in years. The crushing weight of grief was still there, but somehow it seemed less overwhelming tonight. The next morning, Vincent was at his desk in the jailhouse when the door opened and Beatrice walked in, dressed in a practical riding outfit. Mrs. Lawrence, he greeted her, surprised. What brings you here? I have a proposition, she said, taking a seat across from him. The Western Transit Company needs someone familiar with the territory to advise on security measures for our stagecoach routes. Someone who knows the outlaw threats and the landscape. Vincent leaned back in his chair. You're offering me a job, a consultation, she clarified. It wouldn't interfere with your duties as sheriff, and it would be compensated, of course. He studied her for a moment. This wouldn't have anything to do with tracking Keegan, would it? A smile played at her lips. The company's interests and yours align in that regard. Keegan's gang has cost us thousands. Before Vincent could respond, Deputy Miller burst in. Sheriff, Ryder just came in from the Thompson Ranch, says they spotted 3 men matching Keegan's description heading toward the old mining camp in the foothills. Vincent stood immediately. How long ago? Couple hours at most. Get my horse ready, Vincent ordered, then turned to Beatrice. We'll discuss your proposition when I return. I'm coming with you, she said, standing as well. No, you're not. This isn't like yesterday. Keegan's the real danger. All the more reason you shouldn't go alone. Her green eyes flashed with determination. Besides, I've already proven I can handle myself. Vincent wanted to argue but knew he was wasting precious time. Fine, but same rules as before. You follow my lead, and if I tell you to ride out, you do it. Within the hour, they were riding toward the foothills where abandoned mining camps dotted the landscape. The particular camp they were heading for had been deserted for years after the silver vein ran dry. We should approach from the east, Beatrice suggested as they neared the area. There's more cover that way, Vincent glanced at her. You've been here before. I studied maps of the area before coming west, she explained. The company had considered using some of these old camps as way stations. They left their horses tethered in a grove of trees and proceeded on foot. The mining camp consisted of several dilapidated structures, a main building, a bunkhouse, an assay office, and various equipment sheds. From their vantage point behind a rocky outcropping, Vincent could see 3 horses tied outside the main building. They're here, he whispered. We need to. A shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off the rocks inches from his head. Vincent pulled Beatrice down as more shots followed. They've spotted us, he shouted over the gunfire. Stay down. He peered around the rocks and returned fire, forcing one of the outlaws to duck back inside the building. We're pinned down, Beatrice observed. They have the advantage of position. Vincent assessed their situation grimly. The outlaws had them trapped with little cover between their position and the buildings. Any attempt to advance would leave them exposed. We need a distraction, he muttered. Beatrice pointed to a rusted ore cart on tracks leading into one of the mine entrances. Would that work? Vincent followed her gaze and nodded. If we could set it rolling, it might draw their fire long enough for us to move to better cover. I'll do it, she said. I'm faster and they're less likely to shoot at a woman. That's a terrible plan, Vincent objected. Do you have a better one? He didn't. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "I'll provide covering fire. On my signal, run to the cart, give it a push, then get to those rocks by the assay office. Don't stop for anything." Beatrice nodded, readying herself. Vincent took a deep breath, then leaned out and fired 3 rapid shots at the main building. Now, she sprinted toward the ore cart, her movement immediately drawing fire from the outlaws. Vincent continued shooting, forcing them to keep their heads down. Beatrice reached the cart, strained against its weight for a moment, then got it moving down the slight incline toward the main building. The cart picked up speed, rattling loudly on the rusty tracks. As planned, it drew the outlaws' attention, and they fired at it repeatedly. In that moment of distraction, Beatrice dashed to the rocks by the assay office, and Vincent used the opportunity to move to a better position closer to the bunkhouse. Now they had the outlaws caught in a crossfire between them. Vincent signaled to Beatrice, and they both opened fire simultaneously, forcing the men to retreat deeper into the main building. "Keegan," Vincent called out, "you're surrounded. Come out with your hands up." "Like hell, Sheriff," came the reply. "You want us, you come get us." Beatrice caught Vincent's eye and pointed to the back of the building. He understood her plan immediately. While he kept them distracted from the front, she would circle around to cut off their escape. He nodded his agreement, then called out again to keep their attention. "You're only making it worse for yourselves. Your other men are already in jail." As Beatrice slipped away, Vincent continued the exchange, moving occasionally to make it seem like there were more deputies with him. Minutes passed tensely until a shot rang out from behind the main building, followed by a cry of pain. "Drop it," Beatrice's voice commanded. "Sheriff, I've got one." The distraction worked. Vincent rushed the front door, kicking it open to find Keegan and his remaining man scrambling for position. Before they could react, Vincent had his gun trained on them. "It's over," he said firmly. "Drop your weapons." Keegan, a hard-faced man with a scar running down his cheek, slowly lowered his gun. "Didn't expect you to have a woman doing your fighting, Sheriff." "That woman just captured your man and helped bring down the rest of your gang," Vincent replied. "Show some respect." Outside, Beatrice had the 3rd outlaw on his knees, her rifle trained steadily on him despite the blood seeping from a graze on her arm. "You're hurt," Vincent said, concern evident in his voice. "It's nothing," she assured him, "just a scratch." They secured the prisoners and prepared for the journey back to town. As Vincent bandaged Beatrice's arm, he found himself admiring her composure. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've seen," he told her. She winced slightly as he tightened the bandage. "Sometimes they're the same thing." "Why take that risk? You could have been killed." Beatrice met his gaze steadily. "Because it was the right thing to do, and because—" She hesitated. "Because I'm tired of just existing, Vincent. Today, helping you, I felt alive again." Her words struck a chord deep within him. He knew exactly what she meant, because he felt it too, that spark of life that had been missing since Sarah died. For the first time in 3 years, he had something to lose again, and it terrified him. The return to Redemption Creek with Keegan and his men caused even more of a sensation than their previous arrival. The notorious outlaw had terrorized the region for over a year, and his capture was cause for celebration. The town council immediately called for a proper festival to honor the sheriff's bravery. Vincent, uncomfortable with the attention, retreated to his office as soon as the prisoners were secured. Beatrice followed him, her arm properly treated by the town doctor. "You're missing your celebration," she said, closing the door behind her. "It's not my celebration," he replied, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey and offering her one. "It's the town's excuse to have a party." She accepted the drink. "You don't enjoy parties." "I used to. Sarah loved dancing." He took a sip of his whiskey. "Haven't had much cause for celebration since." Beatrice settled into the chair across from him. "My consultation offer still stands, you know. The company would benefit from your expertise." Vincent considered it. What exactly would it entail? Riding the routes, identifying vulnerable points, recommending security measures. "Perhaps even training our guards." She leaned forward. "It would mean traveling, sometimes for weeks at a time. I have responsibilities here. Your deputy seems capable enough for short periods." And Redemption Creek isn't exactly a hotbed of criminal activity, Keegan notwithstanding. Vincent couldn't argue with that. Most days his job consisted of breaking up the occasional bar fight and reminding rowdy cowboys to keep the peace. "I'll think about it," he finally said. Beatrice smiled. "That's all I ask." Over the next few weeks, as plans for Keegan's trial proceeded, Vincent found himself spending more and more time with Beatrice. They rode together, surveying the stagecoach routes as she'd proposed. He showed her his favorite spots in the territory: a hidden waterfall, a mesa with views that stretched for miles, a quiet bend in the creek where the fishing was good. In turn, she shared stories of her life back east, of the business world she navigated as a woman alone, of her dreams for the future. Sometimes they talked about Sarah and Edward, finding comfort in shared grief rather than isolation. One evening, as they sat by the creek after a long day's ride, Beatrice asked, "Do you ever think about leaving Redemption Creek?" Vincent skipped a stone across the water's surface. "Sometimes. There's not much holding me here anymore." "What about your house, the one you built for Sarah?" "It's just a house now," he said quietly, "empty walls and memories." She nodded in understanding. "After Edward died, I couldn't bear to stay in our Boston home. Too many ghosts. That's partly why I threw myself into running the company, why I came west." "And has it helped?" Being away from those memories, Beatrice considered the question. "Not at first. The grief followed me, but lately." She glanced at him. "Lately I've found new memories worth making." The implication hung in the air between them. Vincent felt something stir within him, a longing he'd thought dead and buried with Sarah. It frightened him, this resurrection of feeling. "I should get you back to town," he said, standing abruptly. "It's getting late." Beatrice's expression flickered with disappointment, but she nodded and rose as well. The ride back to town was quiet, the easy companionship of earlier replaced by an uncertain tension. At Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, Vincent helped Beatrice down from her horse. Their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary. "Vincent," she said softly, "I want you to know that I understand. Grief isn't something you just set aside, it becomes part of you." "Beatrice, please let me finish. I'm not asking you to forget Sarah." "I would never want to replace her in your heart." She took a deep breath. "But I believe there's room in a heart for more than one love. Edward will always be part of me, just as Sarah will always be part of you. That doesn't mean we have to stop living." Vincent stood frozen, unable to find words for the tumult of emotions her words evoked. "Good night, Sheriff," she said finally, when it became clear he wouldn't respond. She turned and entered the boarding house, leaving Vincent alone with his thoughts. He rode home slowly, his mind in turmoil. Beatrice's words echoed in his head, challenging the wall he'd built around his heart since Sarah's death. Part of him wanted to surrender to the feelings growing between them, while another part recoiled in fear and guilt. At home, Vincent poured himself a drink and sat in Sarah's rocking chair, the one he'd carved for her when she was carrying their child, the baby they lost before it drew breath. The double tragedy had nearly broken them, but they'd found their way back to joy together. When the fever took her 3 years later, he hadn't had the strength to find his way back alone. "What would you say, Sarah?" he whispered to the empty room. "Would you want me to move on?" In the silence, he could almost hear her practical voice. "Vincent Hart, don't you dare use me as an excuse to be miserable." The thought brought an unexpected smile to his face. It was exactly what she would have said. Sarah had been full of life, always pushing him to embrace joy rather than dwell on sorrows. The next morning, Vincent woke with clarity he hadn't felt in years. He completed his rounds through town, checked on the prisoners, then made his way to the stagecoach office where Beatrice was working. She looked up as he entered, her expression guarded. "Sheriff, what can I do for you?" "I've been thinking about your consultation offer," he said, removing his hat. "Oh," she set down her pen. "And have you reached a decision?" "I have. I'd like to accept with one condition." Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "That you have dinner with me tonight, not as business associates, as—" He hesitated. "As a man and a woman who enjoy each other's company." Her face softened, a smile spreading across her features. "I think that can be arranged, Sheriff Hart." That evening, Vincent arrived at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house wearing his best shirt, freshly shaved, with a bouquet of wildflowers he'd gathered from the meadow outside town. Mrs. Wilson answered the door with a knowing smile. "My, don't you clean up nice, Sheriff." "Come in, Beatrice will be down shortly." He waited nervously in the parlor, feeling like a schoolboy rather than a grown man of 35. When Beatrice appeared on the stairs, his breath caught. She wore a deep blue dress that brought out the green of her eyes, her auburn hair arranged in soft curls around her face. "You look beautiful," he said simply. A blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you, you're quite handsome yourself." Vincent offered her the wildflowers. "These pale in comparison, but I thought you might like them." "They're perfect," she said, accepting them with genuine pleasure. "Let me put them in water before we go." He'd arranged for dinner at the hotel restaurant, a private table in the corner, away from curious eyes. As they ate, their conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from books they'd read to places they hoped to see someday. Vincent found himself laughing at her witty observations, something he hadn't done in so long it felt foreign to his face. "It's good to hear you laugh," Beatrice said, her eyes warm. "You have a nice laugh." "I'm out of practice," he admitted. "We'll have to remedy that." After dinner, they walked through town. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. On impulse, Vincent reached for her hand. She entwined her fingers with his without hesitation. "I used to know all the constellations," he told her, looking up. "Sarah taught me. She learned them from her father, who was a sailor." Beatrice followed his gaze. "Would you teach me?" Vincent pointed out the patterns in the sky, Orion the hunter, the seven sisters, the North Star that had guided travelers for centuries. As they reached the edge of town, near the creek that gave the settlement its name, they paused on the small footbridge. "Beatrice," Vincent began, gathering his courage, "I want you to know that I'm still finding my way back to feeling, to living, but being with you these past weeks has reminded me that there's still joy in this world." She squeezed his hand. "I feel the same way, Vincent. When Edward died, I thought that part of my life was over. I never expected to find someone who would understand, who would make me feel this way again." In the moonlight, her face was both vulnerable and hopeful. Vincent raised his hand to gently touch her cheek. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. In answer, Beatrice leaned forward, meeting him halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as years of loneliness and grief gave way to renewed hope. When they finally pulled apart, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd feel this again," he whispered. "Neither did I," she replied. "But here we are." The weeks that followed were transformative for Vincent. He began accompanying Beatrice on longer trips to inspect the stagecoach routes, leaving Deputy Miller in charge for days at a time. Together, they implemented new security protocols that drastically reduced robbery attempts. The Western Transit Company's board was so pleased, they offered Vincent a permanent position as security director. "You should take it," Beatrice encouraged him as they discussed the offer over dinner at his house. She'd become a regular visitor, bringing warmth and life back into the rooms that had stood empty for so long. "You're wasted as sheriff of a town that rarely sees more excitement than a drunken cowboy." Vincent set down his fork. "If I took the job, I'd be traveling constantly." "Yes," she agreed, "all over the Western Territories, seeing new places, facing new challenges." "And where would you be?" Beatrice smiled. "Overseeing operations from the main office in Denver for the most part, but with frequent field inspections, of course." "Denver," Vincent repeated. He'd visited the growing city a few times and had to admit it offered opportunities Redemption Creek never would. "It's a big change." "Life is change, Vincent. Sometimes we choose it, sometimes it chooses us." She reached across the table for his hand. "But we don't have to face it alone." The implication was clear. They'd grown increasingly close over the past 2 months, their relationship deepening into something neither had expected to find again. Vincent had begun to imagine a future with Beatrice, not replacing what he'd had with Sarah, but building something new, something that honored their pasts while embracing the possibility of joy ahead. "I need to think about it," he said. Beatrice nodded. "Of course, it's a significant decision." Later that night, after walking her back to the boarding house, Vincent returned home and pulled out the small wooden box he kept in his dresser drawer. Inside were mementos of his life with Sarah, her wedding ring, a lock of her hair, the letters she'd written him during the war, a sketched portrait of her drawn by a traveling artist. He touched each item gently, remembering. For the first time, the memories brought a bittersweet smile rather than crushing pain. He could almost hear Sarah teasing him. "Vincent Hart, are you hiding in the past because you're afraid of the future?" The next morning, Vincent walked to the telegraph office and sent his acceptance to the Western Transit Company. Then he went directly to Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, where Beatrice was just finishing breakfast. "I've made a decision," he announced without preamble. She set down her coffee cup. "About the job offer, about everything." He took a deep breath. "I'm taking the position, I'm leaving Redemption Creek, but before I go, there's something I need to ask you." Beatrice's eyes widened as Vincent dropped to one knee before her. "Beatrice Lawrence, I know we've both loved and lost. I know we carry those we've lost with us always, but I've found room in my heart for new love for you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled her eyes. "Vincent, are you certain? This is sudden." "I've never been more certain of anything," he said firmly. "Life is too short and too precious to waste in hesitation once you know what you want. And I want a life with you, Beatrice." She wiped away a tear, a radiant smile breaking across her face. "Then yes, Vincent Hart, yes, I will marry you." They were married 2 weeks later in Redemption Creek's small church. The whole town turned out for the ceremony, genuinely happy to see their sheriff find joy again. Deputy Miller, now promoted to sheriff himself, served as best man. Mrs. Wilson, who had become a dear friend to Beatrice, stood as her matron of honor. As they exchanged vows, Vincent felt a sense of rightness, of coming full circle. He would always love Sarah, just as Beatrice would always love Edward. But they had found in each other the strength to live fully again, to embrace the future without forgetting the past. After the ceremony, as they prepared to board the stagecoach that would take them to Denver and their new life, Vincent paused at the edge of town for one last look at Redemption Creek. "Any regrets?" Beatrice asked softly, her hand in his. Vincent shook his head. "Not anymore." As the stagecoach pulled away, Vincent didn't look back again. His focus was on the woman beside him and the road ahead, a road that once seemed impossible to travel, but now stretched with promise before them. 5 years later, Vincent stood on the porch of their Denver home, watching Beatrice in the garden with their 3-year-old daughter, Sarah Elizabeth. Their 1-year-old son, Edward Vincent, slept peacefully in his cradle nearby. The Western Transit Company had flourished under their joint leadership. Vincent's security protocols had made their routes the safest in the West, while Beatrice's business acumen had expanded their operations across 3 territories. But their greatest achievement sat in that garden, giggling as her mother showed her how to plant sunflower seeds. Sarah Elizabeth had Beatrice's auburn hair and Vincent's blue eyes, a perfect blend of them both. Edward Vincent, everyone agreed, had his father's serious expression but his mother's inquisitive nature. As Vincent watched his wife and daughter, a profound gratitude washed over him. Life had taken him on an unexpected journey, through joy and grief and back to joy again. He thought of the man he'd been in Redemption Creek, hollow-eyed and empty-hearted, merely existing from one day to the next. That man wouldn't recognize the Vincent Hart who stood here now, his heart full to bursting with love for his family. Beatrice looked up, caught him watching, and smiled, that same smile that had first cracked the ice around his heart years ago. She whispered something to their daughter, who immediately ran toward Vincent with muddy hands and a beaming face. "Papa, help us plant flowers." Sarah Elizabeth demanded, tugging at his hand. "As you wish, little one," he replied, allowing himself to be pulled into the garden. Beatrice greeted him with a kiss. "Daydreaming again, Mr. Hart?" "Counting my blessings, Mrs. Hart," he corrected, wrapping an arm around her waist. They stood together for a moment, watching their daughter earnestly digging in the soil. Vincent marveled at how life's darkest moments could, in time, lead to its brightest. Had Sarah not died, he would never have become the empty shell of a man that Beatrice encountered in Redemption Creek. Had Edward not passed away, Beatrice would never have come west seeking purpose beyond her grief. "What are you thinking?" Beatrice asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "That grief and joy are two sides of the same coin," he replied. "You can't have one without the capacity for the other." She nodded in understanding. "And would you trade the joy to avoid the grief?" "Never," Vincent said without hesitation, "not one moment of it." As the afternoon sun warmed their garden and their sleeping son began to stir, Vincent Hart, once a man who thought his heart had died with his wife, laughed freely as his daughter presented him with a fistful of dirt and called it treasure. And in that moment, surrounded by the family he never thought he'd have again, he knew it truly was.